Please welcome John Barber and Bramwell Tovey.
Can only go downhill from here.
We have microphones. Do we need microphones? Do you feel we need microphones, or
Yes.
would you like?
There's a handheld one on the table.
Oh, okay. Oh. I have quite a loud voice, but I can, whatever. Oh, here. 1, 2, 3. Oh, on. Yeah.
Like the voice of God. So, good evening.
Hello.
It seems like minutes since we've been together.
It is, yes.
Yes, probably need to add some context to that comment. So, we've just finished a whole weekend with Foden's band at the RNCM Festival of Brass. You must be utterly exhausted.
I must say, when 6:15 came around tonight, and we knew we had to rush and finish and get here quickly, I was very glad. I did not want to conduct any more today, I have to say. And I don't often have that feeling, but when my arms went up for the last take, I remember thinking, it was a bit of a physical effort. That doesn't happen very often, but it's been such an intense weekend. The band were phenomenal. Last night's concert was really tremendous, actually. And I really thought the playing was outstanding. I mean, the band is, I guess, I'm so thrilled to see the mayor of Sandbach here, but I guess you know that this band is world famous. I mean, it's lauded all over the world. Their records sell all over the world. They've got a tremendous reputation, and it's a real privilege and honour to come and perform with you.
And this is not your first year at the festival. Your association with the festival and Paul Hindmarsh goes back quite some time.
Well, I think we did a concert at the festival maybe about 2002 or 3 or something like that, and then I think I came 3 or 4 times, but I hadn't been for about 5 or 6 years. It's very hard because actually, I've got an orchestra. I had 2 orchestras for a while, and
It's greedy, isn't it?
numerous children to look after, and all kinds of things. So I was really pleased to come and do this.
Fantastic. So what I wanted to do really at the start was just to sort of really take you back. I mean, I know Andy's given some of kind of the headline stuff that is absolutely fantastic, and I know that you're very, very generous with your comments about Foden's and the world class and all the rest of it. But as sort of band members and audience here, we similarly are very, very. I have to say this. Yesterday, you did say that in the concert that when we stand you up to take applause, don't do that bashful thing. That's just what you did.
Oh, that's true. I didn't tell you not to do that. There's nothing worse as a conductor. You go like this and you give the first trombone his or her bow, and they go, oh, me? No, you stand up. And I just went, is there modesty? There's sometimes when modesty should not kick in, I suppose.
Right.
Well, that's very kind of you, John. You should feel like that, yes.
Well, thank you, Bram. It wavers, Anyway, so what I would take you back to your early days. Obviously, you were brought up part of the Salvation Army,
yes.
North London.
East London.
East London, a big pub. How did those musical opportunities really kind of present themselves to you in the early days? How did you get all involved?
Well, my family were Salvationists through and through, and in fact, I did some research recently on the internet and discovered Tovey's living in the East End of London, just working class people back in the 1770s. I went right back to 1770, and in or around 1885, somewhere around that time, there must have been a drunken Tovey in the East End of London.
What are the chances?
That would be my great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather. And they would have heard William Booth preaching on Mile End Green by the Bidenbeggar Park. There's a little statue to William Booth just on the A12 exit from East London. And they lived maybe about 4 or 5 blocks south of that statue. And I was always intrigued by this, but I was called Bramwell after, it's a terrible name, and I've had it all my life, and it's just been a real albatross. But my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, worked for Bramwell Booth, who was the son of William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army. in the 1920s. And he called my uncle Bramwell, and my mother called me Bramwell because they were great fans of Bramwell Booth. This is really of no relevance, but you know how in religion there are schisms at certain moments. There was a schism in the Salvation Army in 1929, and there were the pro-Bramwellites and the anti-Bramwellites who thought that it should not be a dynastic succession, the generalship. And Bramwell was asked to retire and was sort of more or less ejected, and my grandfather was part of the pro-Bramwellites. And, you know, it sounds wonderful having a name like Bramwell, but, you know, I've never met anybody who's named their child Bramwell, and the only person I've ever met was a woman in Winnipeg who had a dog, and she said, "Oh, I've named my dog Bramwell after you." So I don't really feel it's been...
The line continues.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, that was great. But in terms of the music?
Well, in terms of the music, everybody in the Salvation Army does something. You sing in the choir, you play in the band, you, if you really get involved, you do both. So on a Sunday, from about the age of 8, I would go to Sunday school at 10 o'clock, while my father went to the open air service with the band. Then at 11 o'clock would be the main service with the grown-ups and the young people all together. That would end at 12 o'clock. We'd race home and have almost always roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. And then at 2 o'clock, we'd be out of the house again at an open-air service. And at 3 o'clock, I would have Sunday school. And then at 5:30, there was another open-air service. And then at 6:30, there was an evening service, but this one was longer. That was an hour and a half. And so it sounds like child abuse, really, isn't it? And then at 10 to 8, the sermon, which was either a hellfire sermon, like a real full-on hellfire sermon, shouting and screaming at you, telling us all that we were going to go to, you know, anyway, we'd have a prayer meeting, and the prayer meeting would either be 10 minutes or another hour, because what would happen was the preacher would invite people to come to the penitent form at the front, and we would sit there in the band saying, "Please don't come, please don't come, please don't come." And then you'd hear pitter at the feet, and everyone would go, "Oh, we're going to be for another hour." And up would come somebody, and then the officer would go with the penitent at the mercy seat, it was called. But interestingly, that was where I learned something so important to me that I've never ever forgotten musically. All day we'd been playing in the band. I would occasionally play piano for the hymns, but during the prayer meetings, the preacher would start singing in any old key, any old revival song or chorus or refrain that came to him or her, male and female preachers, right from the word go in the Salvation Army. And you'd have to pick up the song in the key that it was written in. And I learned to do that, and of course that is, as you know, playing by ear. I learned to play by ear, and how useful was that? Because not by playing by ear, I learned later on to play jazz, and then I also learned to play, the same technique is used for continuo work in Bach and Handel. So when I went and started to have lessons on continuo, I knew what I was doing, and doing figured bass, it's all the same principles, and I learned it all listening to a preacher singing out of tune at a prayer meeting. So the Salvation Army was actually an incredible thing. My grandfather, maternal grandfather, was a beautiful tenor voice. My other grandfather played the euphonium. My dad played the euphonium. All kinds of relatives played in Salvation Army bands. All my sisters sang. All my sisters, I've got 2 sisters, but my mother sang, everybody sang. My grandmother played for the women's club singers. That's the home league singers, they were called, and in those days. And so it was a full-on amateur music-making thing. I mean, absolutely full-on. So in fact, this weekend has just been a complete breeze for you in terms of your regular Salvation Army schedule. Yes, I hope we don't have a prayer meeting tonight, though. It's highly unlikely. But it wasn't, piano is probably now, you would consider your main sort of exponent as a performance. But it wasn't just piano that you played as a younger man. I know you still own a euphonium now. But I own a euphonium, and I own a bass trumpet, and I own a P-bow, actually, which I bought. And in the band, I learned the piano first, so I learned to play classically on the piano when I was about 7. Then joined up with the band when I was about 9, 10, and I started off on second baritone, and I had the very interesting distinction of being one of the world's worst second baritone players. And one day, the tuba player had to leave rehearsal early. We only had one tuba player in the young people's band. And I thought, being a musician and of course a harmonist at the piano, it sounded awful without the bass line. So I asked the bandmaster if I could play, would it be okay if I played on the tuba? I picked up the tuba and I could immediately do everything I wanted to do on the tuba in a way that I couldn't on the baritone or any other instrument. It just worked. I could just, everything, it was freaky really. And I started playing the tuba in orchestras, and then at the Royal Academy, I went as a principal study pianist, principal study tuba, and principal study conductor eventually. So that's what I did. And I also, in the youth orchestra, youth orchestra and school orchestra, I played the double bass. In the school orchestra, I played the violin occasionally, and I taught myself the saxophone. But like all gentlemen, I don't admit to it.
It sounds like you had quite a busy time with your music. Was there space for anything else? Did the young Bramwell have interests in sport or anything else? You know, gambling, bootlegging, anything else?
No, I've always hated gambling. I think gambling's an awful thing. That's the real purist in me coming out. I love cricket. I played cricket a lot at school, and I just went to the local county high grammar school, and in Ilford, I was very interested in lots and lots of things, but the youth orchestra, the youth bands, the choirs, and the various things that I did were pretty. I mean, you know how it is at a school like this, where, and I see it now with my own children. My eldest daughter is just like music nuts. She comes to every concert I do. She does. She goes to school at 7 a.m. 5 days a week to be in the band or the choir or the orchestra, and it just becomes fairly all-consuming. And then I was at school. I was sort of reasonably successful. I managed to creak through, and then when I got to the academy, I did a degree at London University at the same time. So that's when I went, and that was what was that? 1972. Yikes!
Wow. I wasn't born then. Sorry, apologies. So we move on to music college. As you said, you've got 3 first studies now, conducting, obviously the tuba and the piano. Obviously, just backtracking, the conducting, at some point we've gone from sort of playing in the band and obviously accompanying and listening by ear. At what point did the baton start calling? At what point did you think, you know, this is something I want to do? Was it just a challenge? Was it something different? Was it, how did you get there from
That's a, how did I get here from there? You know, when I was about 11, I had always picked up knitting needles and all kinds of things and pretended to conduct and so on and so forth. And it was very hard then. I mean, nowadays, anyone who wants to conduct can have a go. People are put up on the podium. I've given countless people various opportunities as young conductors. But when I was 11, and then when I was growing up, there were no opportunities for young conductors. It was felt you had to be about 40 before you started conducting. And this actually was... there was a week of my life, and it began on, oddly enough, the day Mozart died, December the 5th, not the same year, of course, 1968. On the previous weekend, on the previous Sunday, I had been with the Redbridge Youth Band to Aldborough to play a concert. Imogen Holst happened to be at that concert, that's just a detail. And the concert was conducted by Geoffrey Brand, who was conducting our band at that time, who's since become a very close friend. And my father had been very, very ill with cancer. For about 18 months, he was on radiant treatment at Guy's Hospital, and often would be unable to go to work and unable to get out of bed. But he got in the car that day and he drove me to Aldborough. Normally I would go in the coach. But my mum said to me, "You need to come in the car today." I said, okay. So I went in the car, and we drove from Redbridge to Aldborough, which is where Benjamin Britten, the composer, had his beautiful concert hall, where we used to go with the youth orchestra once a year. And Dad drove us there, and we drove back, and we stopped at a sweet shop. I had to translate that from the Canadian candy store. We stopped at a sweet shop and bought some chocolate, and I remember looking at my dad and thinking how frail he was. Anyway, the next day, Dad went to bed and he couldn't get up. He never got up again. And 4 days later, he died. He died on December the 5th, 1968. And it was it was one of those things back then that you didn't discuss impending death of your parent with the kids. You just like stiff upper lip, get on with it. And I remember being driven in the back of the hearse to the funeral and just losing it. And it was awful. He was 48 years old. He'd left school at 14. He was the first year of conscripts in 1939. He was in Belgium by October 1939. He was invalided out twice before Dunkirk, and then had to spend the rest of the war in the Pay Corps. But he was a very short man, very quiet, very smart, Brady, and all of a sudden he was very dead. And I was woken up by my mother at about 3:30 in the morning, and she told me to get my sister, who lived nearby with her husband. My sister was 11 years older than me. I was 15, and I went downstairs and phoned, and I thought, why am I being disturbed in the night? And then Dad said, I heard him say to my mother, get him to bed, he's got school tomorrow. And I went downstairs and thought, I felt almost angry about it, what's going on? And then they came downstairs and said, Dad died. I had no idea he was dying, not a clue. And the next morning he had a huge lesion, a huge like aneurysm in his head. We didn't even know he had cancer of the brain too. He had it in the stomach, it was all over him. And of course back in 1968 the treatment was dire. The funeral happened on the Tuesday, about 5 days later, and on the Friday we had a youth orchestra concert, my youth orchestra, and everybody thought it'd be a good idea if I did the youth orchestra concert. So I did, and I went and I played in the concert, and I had an arrangement of something, a football tune, I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles, which I'd done, which was almost the first orchestral arrangement. I think it was the first I'd ever done. And everyone played it, and I was given a big ovation at the end, and I remember feeling bizarre to feel happy about that at this time. And the next morning we had one more rehearsal at our music school, and the conductor said, who wants to conduct? And everybody said, Bram. They must have cooked it up. I never discovered if they did. Because I was extremely shy and of course baffled by what had happened in the previous 7 days. So I got up there and I walked to the front of the orchestra and I conducted Shostakovich Festive Overture. I was 15 years old. My father had died the week before, so he never saw me conduct. And the music advisor said, okay, well, you lift the baton here and you do this, and then it'll collapse here, so I'll come and tell you what to do next. But I'd already worked out in my head how I thought what you had to do to conduct. And I loved this piece of music. I've conducted it hundreds of times in New York and all over the world now, but back then I didn't know it very well, but I played in it. And I conducted it, and it just went sailing right to the end. And it's hard to describe the feeling, the visceral feeling when you raise your baton. And this is the first time, and most of you will never have this experience, but you've had it. And you drop the baton down and the sound happens. And when the group knows the piece, the conductor, no matter how competent or incompetent he or she is, everything the conductor does affects the sound. And I've seen, when we have auditions for assistant conductor in Vancouver, we have some terrible conductors come along. Some of them are brilliant, some of them are terrible. And the terrible ones affect the sound. It's impossible not to be affected by that. Anyway, whatever happened, I conducted this thing, and I left the stage, and there was applause ringing in my ears, and I was really in a peculiar place. I went home, and all weekend I remember thinking about this feeling I'd had, and connecting it with the sadness that had happened the week before, and the state that my mother was in. She was only 48. And that was my very first experience of conducting, and so ironic that it would come just a week after my father died, because he would come up to pick me up from rehearsals and look through the window at the rehearsal. But that was the first rehearsal we'd had that I'd been to that he didn't do that, and it was the first time I conducted.
Wow. Blimey.
You did ask.
I did ask. Anyone need a drink? So, obviously, music college took place. It's fantastic, and then shortly after this, you find yourself working at Savage Wells. You're working with the Covent Garden.
Yes, so it wasn't quite as smooth as that.
Did not?
No, because when I was at the academy, in the first year you weren't allowed to do conducting. So I had to do an audition. And I put an orchestra of my own together to friends and teachers and students, anyone who played an instrument I could get to come and play. And we did a concert, and we did Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and I conducted that, Seventh Symphony, excuse me, and I auditioned with the first movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony to be on the course. And halfway through the exposition, Maurice Miles, who was taking the course, came up and said thank you and shook my hand, and I thought, well, that's not very good, didn't get very far in. And I went home and was very nervous, and on the Monday morning I went back to the academy because I'd heard that the names were posted. And I looked on the board for the junior course, junior conducting course, and my name wasn't there. And in that moment, I said to myself, okay, I'm not good enough to do that. I need to concentrate on something else now. And I walked into the common room, and I was kind of dealing with the issue. It was a bit emotional inside. And when I went into the common room, everyone said, fantastic, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. And I thought they were being cruel or ironic or mocking or whatever. And they said, no. I said, I'm not on the list. They said, you are, go back and look. Don't be silly. So I went back and I looked, and I'd been put straight into the advanced course. I'd skipped a year, and so I joined this advanced course, which had Adrian Leeper in it, who became the conductor of the Spanish Radio Orchestra, Jonathan McPhee, who is now the music director of the Boston Ballet in the United States, and a bloke called Simon Rattle, I've lost track of. Yeah.
I think he played West Back for West Ham, didn't he? Wow, so it's quite an alumni.
Well, it was in a way, but I mean, then we had a year of lessons and whatnot, and I'm not sure what we learned, but I mean, at least it was some exposure, and I got a nice little diploma at the end, and all that.
Amazing. So, are we okay to sort of scan forwards to...
No, I just wanted to get that little line.
You wanted to mention Simon Rattle?
Well, no, I mean, he figures in my story quite a bit, but...
Oh, right.
Yes. But anyway.
So onto the Covent Garden, and you've got these dual roles. You're rehearsal bill, so you're repetiteur, you're rehearsing with singers, and what was the experience like? Was it a challenging place, being surrounded by my experience of singers at college? I'm apologising if there are any here. There are sometimes can be
insane,
emotional, highly strung, diva-ish. When you're sort of working full time in an environment that has many of these characters, were there some challenging moments at all? Or?
Oh, lots and lots and lots.
Right.
I didn't go straight to the Opera House. I went from the academy. I got a job at London Festival Ballet working with Nureyev. He was really challenging because he, for somebody who didn't really speak much English, he knew every bad word in the English language. And he was very funny. It is a very funny story with Nureyev because I was one of the piano repetitors. I used to play the piano scores of the ballets that were being choreographed, and he choreographed Prokofiev's Romeo and Juliet. So I was one of the pianists. There were three of us, I think, on that production. And then I was the assistant conductor when it was performed. So I always used to say, and then we took it on tour, and I always used to say, well, I used to go on tour with 40 young ballerinas. It was a tough job, but somebody had to do it, And we were, there's a little musical example if I can give here, because I think, I tell this joke in Canada, I have to explain the joke, but actually everyone here I think will get it. Nureyev was rehearsing the march of the Knights from Romeo and Juliet. Everybody recognises this, I'm sure. It's a very famous and quite a forbidding a tune, and it began with this. And then it went off. Well, these opening 8 beats, Nureyev was never satisfied with what the dancers were doing. He wanted them to look more imperious. He wanted them to look violent, threatening, And quite honestly, that's a little bit difficult when you're in doublet and tights. and so what happened was that I wasn't in a doublet and tights, obviously. We would do this time and time again. This went on and on. Nerith would say, no, and he'd swear at them and say, do it again. Now, I'm observing my colleague, a man called Michael Bassett, is at the piano at this point. And Michael was unflappable, totally unflappable, brilliant. And I learned a lot from him. And this went on 4 or 5 times. There were these opening chords. And eventually he got fed up with this. And so this is what he played. Rather than lose his temper with Nerith, he did this. Which, of course, most of our generation knows is Dixon of Dock Green. And Nerith had no idea what Dixon of Dock Green was, not a clue. And he was like, and of course everybody's screaming with laughter. And Dixon of Dock Green, for our younger viewers, was a program starring Jack Warner as a policeman, a sort of friendly, incorruptible policeman sitting behind a table and just very affable and the villains they were kind of good villains too. There were no, it was nothing like Operation U-Tree or anything like that. It was all very, very well, it was good old-fashioned burglaries and car thefts.
I'm delighted that within a school environment you managed to slip U-Tree in.
I'm sorry, I forgot. Sorry.
No, I think we're all friends here. That's amazing. So eventually you did get to the Royal Ballet, and obviously a fantastic experience. And was it during your time there that it was a moment that you were involved and you met Leonard Bernstein? Was that during those 4 years?
Yeah, it was actually. 1986 was quite an amazing year. In 1983 was my first year there, and we toured to Canada. It was the first time I went to Canada. We did 8 weeks. We used to do an 8-week international tour with the Sandals Wells Royal Ballet, which was in those days the touring group of the Royal Ballet Company. So it would be same productions, many of the same dancers. I was principal conductor and in charge of the orchestra. We had our own orchestra. That company eventually became the Birmingham Royal Ballet, which is still affiliated to the Opera House, but I left just before they went to Birmingham. And in 1985, we did a tour of the US. In 1984, we were in East Germany and Poland, and anyway, we did a tour like that every year. It was a lot of touring. And in '86, I had written a ballet for David Bentley, that choreographer, wanted a score written around some kind of Russian music was the remit. And I wrote a score to the Snow Queen story, and it was based on some sketches that Mussorgsky had left behind after he died. He was a bit of a reprobate, he was a drinker, so Mussorgsky had left a lot of incomplete work behind, died at the age of 44. And I put this thing together. We were on tour in America, first of all in New York, and Princess Margaret came to the performance of the Sleeping Beauty that I was conducting, the company did. And she said to me, I hear you're doing the music for the new production of The Snow Queen. And I said, yes. She said, how's it going? I said, well, it's pretty good. I said, except the day job gets in the way sometimes, so I'm trying to finish it. And she said, oh, I'm sure you'll get it done. She was a wonderful patron of the Royal Ballet. She was absolutely fantastic, hilariously funny. I mean, really very relaxed, not at all like any of the documentaries and things that you see. Maybe a little sad around the edges, but very funny. Anyway, we came back and I was desperately trying to finish this thing, and it was due to open on the 28th of April, Tuesday the 28th of April in Birmingham, and then it ran afterwards at the Royal Opera House. It was opening on Monday the 27th in Birmingham, and then yes, and after it. So I'm at home on Sunday the 26th. Funny how these dates sort of just stay in the head. And I'm just rattling around in my house on my own, doing my ironing to get ready at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to drive to Birmingham. And the phone rings. who's this? Something's happened. So I answered the phone, and it was now he's Sir Clive Gillinson. In those days, he was the managing director of the London Symphony Orchestra. Now he runs Carnegie Hall in New York. And Clive said, we have a problem. We're opening a new festival series. A Leonard Bernstein festival opens on Tuesday with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Barbican. And Lucas Foss, who was due to conduct the first concert, has gone sick. He's got food poisoning. He can't get on the plane in New York. And it's quite a complicated program. And, it's run by musicians, the LSO. The musicians have said that we should try and get you to do it. They think you'd be able to do it. Would you come and do it? So I pretended to think about it and said yes. It was quite amazing. They said, we can't get you the music tonight because it's with the program note annotator. We can't reach him, but we'll have it for you for 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. So I turned up at the Barbican at 10 a.m. the next morning, and I had to wait for the music to arrive, and then I had to sight read it in front of the LSO. That was the morning and afternoon rehearsal. John Ogden played Rhapsody in Blue, not terribly well. He was a brilliant man, but he was very ill by then. And then at tea time, I caught the train up to Birmingham, conducted the world premiere of my score, shook hands with Princess Margaret, and she said to me, "Oh, you finished it then?" I was amazed that she'd remembered. Went to supper with her and the principals and the directors of the company, and then the next morning caught the train back to London and did the dress rehearsal with the LSO. And about halfway through the dress rehearsal, there was a huge kerfuffle and flashing lights and noise and all this. And at the back of the hall, who should walk in? They didn't tell me he was coming. Leonard Bernstein, with a silk scarf, cigarette in a holder, entourage, a chap walking behind with an ashtray and a glass of water, and just unbelievable. And he came straight up on stage, and he gave me a great big hug, a huge hug, and said, "I've been here, I've deputised at the last minute, and I'm here to help you and to support you. They told me you're doing a good job." Anyway, so I had to conduct his music in front of him, and all the TV stations were there. It was filmed, and then there was a press conference afterwards, and he was unbelievably generous about me. And I conducted the concert. He sat in the audience and stood and took applause, but he wouldn't come up on stage. He said, it's your night. And it was some of his music, some Stravinsky and so on, and Rhapsody in Blue with John Ogden. And afterwards, he said, "I'm going to Tanglewood this summer with the Boston Symphony. Why don't you come and do a study for a week with me?" So I did, and I had supper with him on the Tuesday night at the reception, and then I went back to Birmingham the next day, and I had fish and chips in the car after that. But the great thing about it was I got to meet him, and he was incredible and very, very inspiring. And do you remember, with the National Youth Brass Band, we did a concert in Gateshead, I don't know if you were there, a couple of years ago, and I'm sitting in my hotel room, and my Twitter phone goes ding ding, and it's an old friend from the Halley Orchestra who now works at a library, a press cuttings library in Manchester, and she had found an old news clip of Bernstein interviewing me.
Wow.
And she sent it to me, and I must say it was a very inspiring thing, quite amazing.
You were saying that obviously working with your unflappable friend, so I mean, was there ever a moment when there are situations and there are situations when someone like Bernstein walks in, does that is there anything within you that kind of thinks, I really don't want to mess this up? Sorry to choose my words carefully.
Yes, no, indeed. It's a school environment.
Thank
John.
you. Tree. There we go.
I think yes. I mean, nerves do kick in. There's no doubt about it, and sometimes they can paralyse you a little bit. And I've had paralysing nerves probably 3 or 4 times in my career, and but I've kind of worked out how to sort of deal with that a long time ago. I'm very lucky. Some musicians have to take beta blockers or psychotherapy or whatever, and I'm too mean to spend money on things like that. So I kind of dealt with it, but I was stimulated by his arrival, and I was a stupid young man, so I didn't realise quite how nerve-wracking it was going to be. I was 32 in that, and if that event launched my career, the reviews were really great. I can still quote them to you, but I won't. And it just from then on, everything started to happen for me. And in the orchestral world, I went from being an opera and ballet conductor to conducting concerts very, very quickly overnight. Yeah, you do feel a bit nervous when Leonard Bernstein walks into rehearsal and you're conducting his music. But he was so generous and so effusive and so warm and so supportive, I mean, so supportive, that you couldn't really help it, but just be inspired by it. And the funny thing was, last summer, I went back. I've been to Tanglewood with Boston Symphony numerous times now, but last summer I was conducting Bernstein's opera Candide at Tanglewood, and his daughters came to see the production. One of them was in London for that festival. And anyway, I never thought in 1986 that in 2014, that I would conduct Bernstein's own opera on the same stage. I mean, I had no idea that was going to happen to me, not a clue. Not a clue. Anyway.
I'm just going to, you won't believe it's actually 8:15 already. That's incredible. It's just flown by. I want to, if I can, you made a big decision when a few years later, this opportunity arose in Winnipeg, and there's a big decision to kind of uproot and move over to Canada and spend what was quite a period of time, 11 years working with the orchestra before you. Was that obviously a wonderful opportunity for anybody, to take a professional role? But was it a big decision to kind of remove yourself from your relative comfort zone and relocate over to the other side of the world?
Well, first of all, Winnipeg was an orchestra that I'd been to on the Canadian tour with the Royal Ballet, and they had in those days they had a $6 million budget and a very culturally aware, lots of European refugees from the Second World War still alive and going to concerts and doing all kinds of things. Lots of Holocaust survivors, amazing cocktail of people, of all, I mean, a really diverse, multi-ethnic society that absolutely, completely and utterly worked beautifully on every level. And there was no class system there. There were the wealthy and there were the poor, of course, but basically you could go from 0 to 60 in your life without having to go through what I felt at the time were in England enormous hurdles that you had to get. I was a boy from the East End, but brought up in the Salvation Army, so I had no Anglican tradition behind me. I had a little bit of a Cockney accent because I was born in Ilford. I've kind of had to smooth that away over the years. And I was finding it difficult because I just didn't seem to, I was finding it hard to get a similar opportunity over here. And when Winnipeg offered me the orchestra to be artistic director and conductor, I talked to Peter Hemmings about it, who used to be with the London Symphony Orchestra, and he said, take it, because that's exactly what you need as a conductor. So I took it. I went.
And whilst over there, you set up this new music festival, which obviously still runs today to much acclaim. Was that your own initiative? I know there was the two other gentlemen that you were working with, but it was something you thought of, or what was the sort of driving force behind setting
Well,
up?
I said that I had two composers in residence eventually that I worked with, Glenn Buer and Randolph Peters. But I had this idea that it was very difficult to get people to come out in January because it was minus 40 degrees in Winnipeg. It's pretty cold, And so I thought, well, why don't we do a new music festival? There's two universities in Winnipeg, countless colleges, 500 church choirs in the city. Let's give it a go, or 500 choirs rather. And we put on a new music festival, and John Coriolano came, and a whole host of every major composer, Arvo Pärt, Lohan Dreesen, Mark Anthony Turnage, Gavin Bryars, Joe Tower, Evan J. Curtis. I mean, an enormous number of people came as our distinguished guests, and it started taking off. The concerts were live on CBC Radio. It was very exciting, and it just mushroomed. And I when I first said to the company I'd like to do this, they thought I was crazy. but I just had a hunch it would work, and if it hadn't worked, I'd have only spent 3 years there, I'm sure. But it did work, and it was a great experience.
Wow. From the Winnipeg, it feels almost a shame to kind of rush through this because there's just so much stuff. I spent quite a long time sort of trying to fathom out how you've spent the last sort of many years of your life, and you've been a very busy man. And I think
I just hope you're going to miss out certain details, but
don't worry. Again, I think U-Tree's been mentioned once is enough for the year. It's fine. What I was going to say is obviously after Winnipeg, Luxembourg Philharmonic, and was I right? The orchestra they commissioned Penderecki's 8th Symphony. Is that right?
yes, when the beautiful Philharmonic Hall was opened in Luxembourg, right in the middle of the European Economic Community buildings, I have strong opinions about the EEC from having seen very close up the way it works. Anyway, we had a beautiful, we better not go there at all, but we had a beautiful concert hall which we opened, and we commissioned Penderecki. I conducted the world premiere.
And so was that a big, obviously this is post-Winnipeg, but again it's another opportunity to leave a country that you've just described, that you had a wonderful time. What was it that after 11 years you thought, right, time to head back to Europe? Obviously just another great opportunity? Or?
Well, actually no, I was offered the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, and at the moment I accepted it and started the job, I went to Luxembourg and they offered me the Luxembourg Philharmonic. So all of a sudden we had
two at the same time.
We had very small children. We had a house in Vancouver and a flat in Luxembourg, and my environmental footprint was terrible. And there was sort of hopping backwards and forwards, living in 2 places, and I didn't care for that. It sounds fun, but it really isn't. It's very hard work.
And it was for 4 years you were...
Well, it ended up being for 5, because I was in position for 4 years, but I did it for a 5th.
Your air miles must be astonishing.
Yeah, they're pretty good, actually. Yeah.
Wow, good for you. Right, as the time's getting on, one of the things I want to talk about in the second half is the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, which I know is something you're very, very proud of, and your association with the band. But when I was speaking to some of the Foden's band members here, who've also been fortunate enough to tutor on the courses, one of the things that we've reflected on when we've been fortunate enough to tutor is the morning assemblies. I was wondering if there's a certain thing that you do when it's people's birthdays. But if I can set the scene, if I may, each morning a National Youth Band, all the children, about 90 or 100 of them, they come down for a morning service assembly, a hymn is sung.
So it's a kind of non-denominational...
Absolutely, yeah.
Non-religious thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's a chap called Raymond who reads out a highly improbable sermon, often about a frog in a bucket of milk.
It's a morality tale of some kind.
And a fish that actually is a whale or something, I seem to recall.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things. But if it's somebody's birthday, then you're very, very generously and keen to give them a sort of special birthday present, which is a kind of on-the-spot created piece of music. And I wondered whether or not this is something that, if there's anybody here in the audience who's had a birthday, does anybody here have a birthday today? Has anybody had a birthday this week? Does anybody here have birthdays?
Oh, someone anybody at the back.
Right.
Lady at the back. You have to come down the front and help me then. Yeah,
could you come to the front for a second?
Give her a big round of applause. So this is what we... Now, actually, we did meet briefly outside, I think.
We did.
Right, but we've actually not met before, right?
No, we haven't.
Okay, so that's the correct answer, and it is true. And would you mind just writing? If I hold your wine,
Yeah.
and you hold that, that's good. Thanks. Would you write your full name down? And you'll see why this is in a minute, because it's just to really show kids on the course, and actually I do this in schools as well, about how composers can pluck things from mid-air and create music, and how sometimes the simplest things, such as people's names, can lead to a work of art, or a painting, or a story, or anything. So, Caroline, come sit here. So, we haven't met before today, so we didn't cook this up last night. I'm doing this now. You have quite a lot of musical letters in your name. You have, your name is Caroline Tresman, is that?
Correct.
Tresman. Okay, I didn't put my glasses on for that either. That's C-A, and then E. So these notes. Then you have another E. And then you have an A. But you also have an S which the Germans call an E flat. So if we'd lost the war, we'd be using that. And then you also have an H, which the Germans call a B nat. So actually, you've got several things. So you've got this. This is your name, your tune. It's kind of exotic. Did you know that? Well, you can dance while I play it. So, I won't be able to see you because I'll have my back to you. But I'm going to make up a piece of music for you on the spot because you've got a very exotic name. And the way we do this is I can play a little introduction, and then at the end, all these people are going to help me. And when we get there, you'll understand what it is you have to do. But anyway, happy birthday. It's my present to you. And this is what we do on the youth band course. And I did it the other day for somebody, for a Chinese lady that I'd met in Vancouver. She only had one A in her name. So that was a bit difficult. You've got a beautiful name, so here we go.